What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the My Parents Office podcast. I am your host, Andrew Diaz. It has been a long time since I last recorded an episode, and got it up on the RSS feed. Believe I can actually check and see the last episode we had up. I think this is episode 146. So the last episode went up on August 31st. I am recording this on October 18th. So it's been a while. I've been very busy. So today for episode 146, I'll be going over a little update on what I've been doing along with my kind of tying into what I've been doing, what I've been writing about, which is a lot of college football, a lot of Heisman stuff. So we'll delve into that. But before I get into everything, make sure you're following us on social media at My Parents Office on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube. My Parents Office podcast on Facebook, and Articles from the Office on Substack, which we have. I don't know how many days left in the year, but we are getting towards the end of the year. It is October 18th, like I mentioned. I have blogged so far every day this year. I believe I'm up to around 420 on the year so far. So I'm hoping to finish around maybe 550 on the year. And, there are points where I feel very burnt out from blogging, where I kind of get sick of doing it. And then there's days where I just kind of feel like, I'm in my bag. I feel very good. Like, I feel like I get into a good groove and I bust out 4 or 5 articles in a day, and I'll have those kind of scheduled to go throughout the week. So if there's a day where I don't feel like writing, the blog is set to go out. So I may continue if I'm not feeling too burnt out at the end of the year. Just have the continue and see how many days in a row I can go. I started this journey January 1st of 2022 after taking about an 8-day break around Christmas time last year. So, we'll see how far I could take this train of blogging every single day. But yeah, so little update. Last time I did an episode, I mentioned that I'm coaching this year on the Mass Maritime football team, helping out on the team as kind of a student assistant, helping with the O-line, special teams, all that type of stuff. And it's been an absolute blast. And I'm getting to do stuff that I enjoy. And one of the tough things was realizing that I wasn't going to play this year. Well, it definitely was a bummer because, I played ever since I was, I believe, 10 years old. So I played for, 8 straight years, and 8 or 9 straight years with COVID kind of mixed into that. And I was done. That I don't think I'm ever going to play football again, which when you say that it hurts, but I've kind of realized I don't really miss playing as much as I thought I would, which is definitely weird to say, and it was a weird thought that kind of came into my mind, but that's just kind of how things go, and I really do enjoy coaching. I go back in the winter, I'll coach high school wrestling. Over COVID, I helped coach high school football, so I'm getting to coach, high level athletes at the college level, and I really, really love what I'm doing right now, and I think next year I'll be doing the same thing. Knock on wood. So, that's kind of what's been occupying a good amount of my time is doing that, especially Saturdays or game days, which are huge preparation days. I mean, it's long hours on those days, especially when you got to travel, out to Worcester, Framingham, Fitchburg. So that's definitely been consuming a lot of my time so far, but I love doing it. So I there's nothing else I'd rather be doing on Saturdays, but it's I do kind of want to make a video and like a little day in the life or like before a game type of thing for a home game because you're up early. I try to get up, work out before the games, then I'm helping with recruiting, helping with getting like operation stuff like the field setup. Once I'm done doing recruiting tour on the field for special teams, working with the centers and quarterbacks. When everybody comes out, working with the O-line, and then I'm up in the booth on game days, charting defensive plays, which, in college, I've always been on the offensive side of the ball. So kind of getting a little peek on the defensive side has been, really fun and kind of expanded my knowledge of football, which, I think is super valuable and I love doing. But yeah, so that's kind of been taking up a lot of the time in addition to why I haven't really done the podcast as much the past 2 months was also because, I really, like I mentioned before, I really kind of fell in love with writing. I really enjoy doing it. I think I'm better at writing than I am at doing the show. So, but I still enjoy doing the podcast. It's just tough to, sit down for 45 minutes or plan up with different people, whether it's Brett or getting an interview ready. It's tough to kind of schedule that around a busy schedule with school, um, football, and then I'm getting paid to write now. I'm working with Student Union Sports, so I get paid every week to put up 3 blogs for them. So like that, I have to hit a certain quota. So like that stuff definitely takes priority over doing the podcast. So when I'm back home in the winter, I'm going to be working an internship. Fingers crossed near home. I'll have a lot more time to do the podcast and sit down, really schedule out different interviews that I want to do because I definitely want to get back into the groove of interviewing people that I find interesting, people that I like talking to, and getting a lot of that content back out there. Unfortunately, it's not going to be for a little bit of time. It'll probably be towards the end of December, January, February, and then possibly in the spring when spring football is going on, when it's a little bit less of a workload. So that's definitely something to look forward to. But right now, that's just not in the cards for the next 2 months at the moment, which is definitely a bummer because in college football, but I look at it, it's a bummer and it's not because I like talking to college football players. It's tough to get a college football player on the show now in season. Once the season ends, it's a lot easier to talk to those guys. Um, and, we're going to kind of pick the podcast back up and get in a more of a rhythm, Brett and I, once college wrestling season rolls around, which is what both of us are very passionate about. So that's definitely something else to look forward to. If you're a college wrestling fan, if you don't know anything about it, I still recommend you listen because we're both super into it, super passionate. We're watching dual meets on whether it's Sundays, Wednesdays, Saturdays, no matter what, we're watching college wrestling. So those are, I think, things to definitely look forward to as the season or the as the podcast picks up a little bit in the coming months. But I think I put my goal at the start of this year to hit 200 episodes. Obviously, that's not going to happen as we're at 146 now. I could see us maybe to get like 155 by the year's end, which is still going to be, tough. That's 9 more episodes, but you never know. But I think 200 by the end of next year is manageable. Maybe in the 210, 220 range would be cool to definitely hit. And it would be a cool milestone just for Brett and I in general. We've been working on this podcast since COVID started. This is I call it a COVID baby. That's when I had the idea to do the show. Brett hopped on board to produce it, and we haven't really looked back since. So that's definitely what the plan is for the podcast as time goes on. And like I mentioned before, I am getting paid to write now. It's not much. It wouldn't be a full-time job for me or even a part-time job, but I'm actually getting paid to do what I love. And writing is what I love. So I have the great opportunity to be writing for Student Union Sports with a great crew: Liam, Luke, Hoppa, Pat Norton. And in addition to that, I'm also on their college football podcast. Is it Saturday yet? I definitely recommend you go listen to that. So I kind of every Wednesday I pencil in some time to do that podcast because it's college football once a week. It's not that strenuous. It's enjoyable to do. Um, I'm in a conference room on campus and there's very few here, so people try to come in. But so that'll be definitely an issue I run into. It's one I've run into very often. But yeah, so I'm doing Is It Saturday Yet? I would definitely recommend you go check that out on all streaming platforms. It's a big college football rundown of, the week that just happened, a preview of what's to come in the next few weeks, along with now we're in Heisman time. So I'm going to talk about a little Heisman stuff as this episode goes on. And then we give our gambling picks as well. And, the first 3 weeks, it was just Luke Owens and I doing the show because Hop got married. Hops on. And then, we've really built up great rapport, great chemistry as a group for that show, and the episodes are a blast to do. Whether we're agreeing, disagreeing, arguing about college football, it's always a good time and it's fun to do. And college football is what I really love to talk about. So being able to do that with a group of guys that feel the same that I do is super enjoyable. So yeah, like I said, check that out. In addition, I'm also now helping out with the CFB Talk Daily Twitter account. Has over 25,000 followers. I'm sort of on and off with their podcast because, it started off that we were doing the show and then um, kind of fell off a little bit, but now we do Twitter Spaces occasionally where I'll hop in there, talk about college football. It almost feels like a mini radio show because people join, they request to speak, and I was texting with the guy that runs that account, and we were joking. It's like Mike Francesa, where you see Francesa hit the button for his calls, except we don't get any prank calls about Jason Giambi, so that is definitely nice. But so I'm in full college football mode at the moment. Once that ends, it'll be tough to find stuff to write about. I'll be completely honest because, it's what I write about predominantly is football. What I talk about predominantly is football. So that's taken up a big chunk of my life since, about mid-July to now, and it will go until roughly, end of February. Actually into the draft. So maybe around March, May, into that time. So it's I love it. It's full time kind of going over this stuff as all while also being a student, but there's no other sport I'd like to be talking about. With that being said, that's kind of the quick update on why the pod hasn't been as prominent lately, but I do want to talk a little Heisman. I kind of hit at the midway point last week. I went over who my top 5 Heisman candidates were at the moment. I had Ohio State QB CJ Stroud at 1, Tennessee QB Hendon Hooker at 2, Alabama outside linebacker Will Anderson at 3, UCLA quarterback Dorian Thompson-Robinson at 4, and Alabama running back Jahmyr Gibbs at 5. My honorable mentions were Mississippi State QB Will Rogers, Alabama QB Bryce Young, and Michigan running back Blake Corum. That was after week 6 going into week 7. Now it's kind of shaken up a little bit, especially with that Tennessee win. And I think with Bryce Young missing a game, I definitely think that hurts him to repeat as the Heisman winner. So my new order, I have a tie at number 1 between CJ Stroud and Hendon Hooker. Number 3, I have Michigan running back Blake Corum, UCLA quarterback Dorian Thompson-Robinson at 4 again, and Illinois running back Chase Brown at 5. My honorable mention, running back Jahmyr Gibbs from Alabama. Alabama outside linebacker Will Anderson, USC QB Caleb Williams, and UNC QB Drake May. Hobson is another honorable mention. And, with Stroud at number 1, I feel very confident. I think he's going to win the Heisman this year. He's just so consistent. And, his Heisman moment isn't going to come until, probably when they play, definitely not this week against Iowa, but probably when they end up playing Michigan. I mean, if he balls out, has a great game, and that would go the same against he has a great game against Penn State in a few weeks. That's really what defines him and will be his Heisman moment and kind of solidify it for him. I think he's the clear front runner. At this point of the year, he's got over 1,700 yards, 24 passing touchdowns, no rushing touchdowns, and then only 3 interceptions. He's only been sacked 4 times. I mean, that's really great stats. But they also haven't played, tremendous competition. Their one big win, and I wouldn't even call that a big win now, is against my Notre Dame Fighting Irish, who they beat 21-10, who they are kind of on a bit of a rough skid, losing to Stanford and Marshall this season has definitely hurt. But I try to forget that. But I've got Stroud as that number 1, and his Heisman moment really comes down to Penn State and Michigan when he plays against those teams. And then, I had Hendon Hooker at 2 last week. I had to bump him up at a tie for number 1 because that win against Alabama is just so huge for him. It's ridiculous watching him play. He's just so electric. And going into the season, I didn't have a ton of faith in him as like the guy at Tennessee. But, he's proven me wrong and proved a lot of people wrong with 1,800 yards this year passing, 3 rushing touchdowns, 15 passing touchdowns, only 1 pick. and almost 300 rushing yards. He has wins against, at the time, beat number 17 Pitt, at the time beat number 20 Florida, at the time beat number 25 LSU, and then last week beat Alabama. And with how good the SEC is, his Heisman moments will just continue to build when, they play against Kentucky, Georgia, South Carolina, and then possibly in the SEC championship if they're able to beat Georgia. It would be very cool to see him and the Vols playing for an SEC championship and even seeing them get in the playoff, because I really love the idea of college football being a state of chaos consistently, where this year there's about 8 teams that are, fighting for a playoff spot. You've got obviously Alabama with 1 loss is fighting for it, Georgia at undefeated, Tennessee undefeated, Ohio State undefeated, Michigan undefeated. Then you throw in wild card teams like UCLA, who's undefeated. If they win the Pac-12, you have to put them in, I feel like. And that goes the same with if TCU wins the Big 10, or the Big 12, I should say. You have to put them in. It's kind of a no-brainer if they go undefeated. Then you've still got Ole Miss, who's undefeated. A 1-loss Oregon, who their 1 loss is to Georgia, has a very good resume to get into the playoff. And even a 1-loss Oklahoma State that wins the Big 12 has a decent argument to make the playoff. So at this point of the year right now, it's an utter state of chaos, and I live for that week after week after week. And just it's what makes college football so special. That's what I think sets it apart for me, where it's like the NFL's here, college football's up here, where every week is just so unpredictable. And I absolutely love that. So it would be cool to see Tennessee make the playoff, win the SEC would be very cool, and, see Hendon Hooker possibly win the Heisman. At number 3, I have Michigan running back Blake Corum, who I had as an honorable mention last week, and I had Jahmyr Gibbs above him just because I felt more confident in Gibbs out of the backfield as a pass threat. He had a really big game against Texas when Bama needed him most, when the ground game wasn't working against a good Texas team. But I just think Corum has, at this point, jumps Gibbs as the best back in college, and running behind a very talented Michigan offensive line helps, but he's still shredding defenses. He has, in the past 4 games, has gone for over 120 yards against Penn State, 166, Indiana, 124, Iowa, 133, Maryland, 243. He's got 13 rushing touchdowns, 901 rushing yards this year. Isn't a threat really at all out of the backfield in the pass game. But when you're that good at running the ball, you don't need to be this dual threat back that teams kind of look to have. You just need to be able to pound the rock. I mean, he's averaging 6.2 yards per carry, and is the reason that Michigan's offense runs as efficiently as it does, because Michigan's offense is very one-dimensional when you look at it, because it's like pound the rock, pound the rock, pound the rock. Oh, we're going to hit you over the top of the play action pass. It's like how the Vikings, because as a Vikings fan, I watched them so much last year and the years before they got Kevin O'Connell in as their head coach, was very similar, where it was give it to Dalvin, give it to Dalvin, give it to Mattinson, give it to Dalvin. All right, now we're going to hit a play action with Thielen or Jefferson over the top, and that's our big hitter. Right now, that's what Michigan is kind of doing, and it's a lot less of the play action and more of the pound the rock, pound the rock, pound the rock theory, which, as a former O-lineman and a guy that loves watching that, I enjoy it. Even though I'm not a Michigan fan, I like to see O-linemen really get after it and just move flesh. Number 4, staying in the number 4 spot, is UCLA QB Dorian Thompson-Robinson. And I think what a lot of people, don't acknowledge when it comes down to the Heisman race is it depends on your team's success as well. You could be, I'll get it, like Jarrett Patterson was one of the best backs in college a few years ago at Buffalo, but he played at Buffalo and Buffalo wasn't that great. That's why he, didn't get a look for a Heisman. When you're playing at UCLA and you've beat 2 ranked teams already in Utah and Washington, and you've thrown for 1,500 yards and run for 230 as a quarterback with a combined 19 touchdowns and 2 picks, you're going to be in that Heisman race. You're going to be in that top 5, in my opinion. And I just think the duo of DTR and Chip Kelly together is so deadly. And it reminds me a lot of Chip Kelly with Marcus Mariota at Oregon, because you have a QB that can both throw the ball very efficiently and will kill you on his legs, whether it's a designed QB power, QB draw, or if the pocket breaks down and he has to get on his horse and run. He is a threat in every facet of the game, which makes him so good. I mean, against Utah, Utah's notorious for having a good defense. He did throw a pick. He did get sacked twice, but he also combined for 5 touchdowns, threw for 4, ran for 1, and also had just south of 300 passing yards against one of the nation's top defenses. I would like really feel wrong not putting him in the top 5 for the Heisman at this point of the season, but they've got a bit of a tough schedule remaining, because the Pac-12 in years past hasn't been great. Right now, it's looking pretty competitive. UCLA has to travel to Oregon this week, and then they've got USC towards the end of the season. You got a tough Arizona team as well, a tough Stanford team. So this season's not over yet. I mean, we're just about halfway. We're just over halfway through right now, where a lot can happen. Guys can emerge as Heisman candidates, just like Chase Brown has at Illinois. Brown kind of was just putting up big numbers at Illinois and wasn't like this well-known back. And then, Illinois, they have, started winning games. They only have 1 loss on the season. They're 6-1, first in the Big Ten West, and they've beaten pretty good teams so far. They beat, I think, a very good Minnesota team. They lost to Indiana, but it wasn't on Brown. I mean, Brown rushed for 200 yards in that game. And then, they beat Wisconsin, who's kind of picked it up since firing Paul Chryst. So Chase Brown's I got the guy I put at number 5 going into week 8, just because of how efficient he's been. In every game this year, he's rushed for over 100 yards. His top game came in that loss to Indiana when he went for 199. What does hurt him a bit is he only has 6 combined touchdowns on the year, which, if you're going to win the Heisman, is not overly impressive to me, because you need to have the yards as well as the touchdowns to go with it. I mean, he's got over 1,100 all-purpose yards, over 1,000 rushing, but he lacks the touchdowns, which hurts. But I feel like with the yards there, that's enough to get him in the top 5. Like I mentioned before, I had Jahmyr Gibbs in the top 5 last week, along with Will Anderson. Both those guys drop out. Corum and Brown jump in. I had Will Anderson because of the A&M game in the top 5 last week, but when you watched him at Tennessee, he wasn't a game changer. And I think you can be a game changer without showing up on the stat sheet. I mean, A&M, he only had 2 tackles, but on the final drive, he had so many QB pressures that it just became impossible for A&M to efficiently run their offense. Against Tennessee, he had 3 tackles, but wasn't wasn't like a game changer like he was in games when he didn't put up a lot of numbers. I still think he's the best defensive player in college and is still a top 7 player in all of college football, maybe even a top 5. But when it comes to the Heisman race, I think he's kind of taken himself out. I mean, unless he has like monster games as the season rolls on against a team like Mississippi State or Ole Miss and Auburn, then I think you can count him out for the Heisman. Gibbs, like I mentioned before, was in there because of his performance against Texas. And I felt like if he did win the Heisman, that would be his Heisman moment, because he just came up so big. Caleb Williams, the guy the beginning of the season was definitely a favorite to win the Heisman, and should still definitely be in contention, because he's got 1,900 passing yards, 19 passing touchdowns, only 1 interception and 3 rushing touchdowns, and their sole loss against a good Utah team. So that should definitely still be taken into consideration, especially if USC decides to run the table and win the Pac-12. I think he'll definitely find himself in New York for the Heisman ceremony. And then my other guy that I had as an honorable mention was UNC quarterback Drake May, who, flying under the radar, because while UNC only has 1 loss, and it is to Notre Dame, they just haven't looked overly impressive. Like, they put up 63 against App State, but also gave up 61, which isn't great. That's not on Drake May at all, but your team's success, like I mentioned, is a giant portion of winning the Heisman. But this year, he's balling out. He's got almost 2,300 passing yards, 24 touchdowns through the air, 3 interceptions, and 3 rushing touchdowns to go with 378 rushing yards. I mean, he's having a great year statistically. He's just not a guy I picture in New York when it comes down to the final Heisman rankings. But yeah, so that is my my Heisman rankings. At least at the moment, I still think there's a lot that can change. And that's what college football, why it's so great, is that aspect that so much changes in the course of a week. So a little bit more on the writing front. I am still doing my alt rock autumn countdown. I missed one day. That was the game we had against Worcester State. I just didn't plan great ahead. I should have probably written it the night before. Didn't do that. Got back home late. So I put out a generic blog that day just about why I wasn't writing the alt rock autumn for that day. But this year I've been more consistent because last year I only got a few out. This year I've been very consistent and covered a wide array of topics in the alt rock universe. Like how we almost had Sleazer, which was Slipknot and Weezer co-touring with each other. I wrote a blog actually today. It came out called Blink 182,000, which is kind of a jab at their ticket prices that they're charging people for their world tour that they're doing in 2023 and 2024. It's crazy that a band that's punk rock has always been like fuck the man, fight the power, and now they're charging. If I wanted to go see them at Mohegan Sun down in Connecticut, if I wanted to sit behind the stage in the nosebleeds, it would cost me about $400 after fees. And if I wanted to be in the pit, it would cost me $1,500. And that's before fees. When, they toured in 2019 with Lil Wayne, and you could have got tickets in Tampa Bay for $40. It just, that type of stuff definitely baffles me. But this isn't the first time we're seeing this price gouging, at least this year. I wrote about it with Bruce Springsteen, a guy that is, Mr. Blue Collar, Mr. The common man for people, is charging $400 for nosebleed tickets and $4,500 for sitting on the ground in the pit. So I just find stuff like that to be so disgusting, where artists do that. So that was one of the blogs I put out. And when it comes to other songs I've actually covered for Alt Rock Autumn, I covered the acoustic version of Teenage Dirtbag, which if you haven't listened to that, please go do it. It's breathtaking. The way that Brendan B. Brown kind of has so much control of his larynx, where he will go from dipping his voice down so low into a deep tone to getting it to a very high pitch when he's singing the final verse. It's so crazy. Please go listen to it. I reviewed a couple albums, When We Were Friends by the Backseat Lovers. And I reviewed side A of Get Rich or Die Ryan, the Spose album, which is an alt rock style album. Also on side B is a hip hop side. So I just did side A, but I've done Everlong by the Foo Fighters, This Charming Man by the Smiths, the meaning behind the name of Smells Like Teen Spirit by Nirvana. So there's a lot out there if you're a alt rock fan. And then I call it a series, but it's just 4 weeks that I'll be doing it. Or 5 weeks, I should say. It's my favorite movies from each decade. I started with the 70s because the 60s doesn't do much for me. Movie wise, there's a handful like the old James Bonds, but it's not that those don't really get my goat. I'm not huge on it. For the 70s, I had at number 1 Apocalypse Now, number 2 A Clockwork Orange, number 3 The Godfather Part 2, which is probably the best mob movie I've ever seen. Number 4 I had Animal House. Number 5 A New Hope, the Star Wars movie. 6 I had The Godfather, which when you look at that trilogy is so crazy because the third one's so bad and the first one's so great, but it's not nearly as great as the second one because the first one is just setting up how great the second one is going to be. So I did add that when I wrote about it. I put Rocky at number 7, A Charlie Brown Thanksgiving at 8, Jaws at 9, and Diamonds Are Forever at 10. And then the 80s are also out now. I can pull that up and kind of go over that one as well. The 90s will be out this week. But for the 80s, at number 10, I had The Empire Strikes Back. Number 9, Revenge of the Nerds. Number 8, Gremlins. Number 7, Raiders of the Lost Ark. Number 6, Full Metal Jacket. Number 5, Rocky 4. Number 4, Mississippi Burning. Number 3, Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Number 2, Vision Quest. And number 1, one of my all-time favorite movies, is The King of Comedy. I have that firmly in that number 1 spot. It's just I put the poster up on my dorm of Rupert Pupkin. It's one of my all-time favorite movie characters. Better to be king for a night than schmuck for a lifetime. And then you get the iconic. I just can't give you 6 weeks. It's if you haven't seen that, it's I think De Niro's best performance. So I definitely go watch that. But I just wanted to hop on here, give kind of an explanation why the pod hasn't been as active over the past 2 months, while also covering some Heisman stuff and a little bit of what I've been writing about. But I have nothing else for you guys. Stay tuned for possible episodes that'll be coming out in the next few weeks. But yeah, definitely stay tuned. Definitely be looking forward to December, January, and February when the pod will start picking back up a little bit. But thank you guys.